Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome once again to our Bible as History series. This is the second episode in this new series. As always, as a way of introduction, we want to identify this important fact that if you are a person of faith and perhaps you've never been able to have those answers that you've been searching for in regards to certain historical events, we hope and pray that this will be a resource to you that you can use. As Christians, we do believe in defending the Bible when it makes claims about certain historical people or certain historical points. On the other hand, perhaps you're someone who's always been a little weary or quite skeptical of the Bible as history. So we hope and pray also that this will be something that can challenge you, get you to maybe think a little bit deeper into the issues, but to also know that we're going to approach this in love, being humble. The goal is to really dig deeper into these issues so we can find the answers that we're looking for. Well, the first episode, you may remember, we looked at the historical location of the Red Sea crossing, and we hope and pray that was helpful to you. Today, we're going to go a little bit further into the Old Testament, looking into the book of Daniel. And of course, the book of Daniel is set mostly during the time of the Babylonian exile. Of course, Babylon was this very powerful empire that came from the east in the what is now Iraq area, and they conquered Jerusalem somewhere in the 605 BC timeline. So that's a little bit of introduction for us to know where we are in the story. And we're looking today at the subject of Belshazzar. And Belshazzar was one of the kings of the Babylonian Empire. And we're asking the question, was Belshazzar a historical person? Now, it seems that over the years, this subject has come under attack because a lot of historians and archaeologists claim that there is no such person as Belshazzar. And of course, for us as Christians who believe in the Bible, that makes us ask, what does that do to our faith? If there is incorrect information in the book of Daniel, would that then lead to other troubling thoughts that there are other errors in the Bible? And so how could it be trusted? So we're hoping to find some answers to this problem today. And so joining me is my dad, Phil Norman. Welcome, Dad. How are you today?
I'm okay, Dale, thanks. And it's great to be doing this series with you. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So, yeah, it's really good.
Thank you. So we understand that you've been doing some research into this historical quest of finding the character of Belshazzar. And so maybe you can update us with sort of what is the status of archaeology today. And if I can just ask you the first question, maybe a very straightforward, blunt question. Was Belshazzar really a historical person?
Well, for many years, there's been a lot of historians and skeptics because we never was able to find Belshazzar's name in history. Let me give you an example. If you take historians like the Greek historian like Xenophon or Herodotus, for example, they write a great deal about the Babylonian Empire and especially about the kings of Babylon. And strangely enough, they never ever put Belshazzar's name on in their history. And so it caused the skeptics then to say, well, if they didn't write about Belshazzar, he obviously didn't exist. And so the problem came that for many, many years, they just said because his name is not on any of the cuneiform texts, because his name is not written by historians, then he doesn't exist. So that was their main critique. We were able, many years, I would say about 150 years ago, about 1856, there were some keen archaeologists that were sent from Britain, England, over to places like Iraq. And one man in particular, his name was John Taylor, better known really as J.E. Taylor. very famous man. He was a good archaeologist. He was under the supervision of the famous Henry Rawlinson. So you could see that he was indeed, he was a man that knew exactly what he was looking for and what he was talking about. And he was lucky enough to discover 4 cylinders in Ur of the Chaldees, in one of the ziggurats. And it was on one of those cylinders that we now call the Nabonidus cylinder that the name Belshazzar turned up. It was a marvelous discovery, which showed the critics were wrong. And so the answer to that question is yes, he was an historical person.
That's wonderful. So we have archaeological evidence outside of the Bible as well, with his name mentioned then.
Oh, very clear. Yeah, very clear. And not just the Nabonidus cylinder. We also discovered sometime later another cuneiform text, which was known as the Nabonidus Chronicle. And again, his name crops up. It was like a poem, and if you like, by his father, Nabonidus. And he actually mentions his son, his eldest son, Belshazzar. So once again, extra biblical sources have told us quite clearly that Belshazzar was an historical person.
That's really encouraging. So just for our viewers, Dad, just to help us to know where we are in the chronology of Babylon, would you be able to give us a list of all the kings so we know where we are in the history?
Well, the first major king, of course, obviously was the father of Nebuchadnezzar. His name was Nabopolassar. And he died in the year 605 BC. And that, of course, was the year that Nebuchadnezzar became king. Nebuchadnezzar died in about 562 BC. He was followed by his son, Evil Merodach. He only reigned for 2 years. He died in 560 BC. Then his son became king. His name was Nerigalissa. And he reigned roughly for about 4 years. And so he died about the year 556 BC. And then he was followed by his son. His name was, he was a young lad. His name was Labashi Marduk. And he only reigned for a very, very short time, maybe for a couple of months, a couple of weeks even. And he was eventually murdered, probably at the hands of Nabonidus. And that's when Nabonidus sort of proclaimed himself as, or people wanted him to become king. But there was no relationship. No, it wasn't a part of Nebuchadnezzar's family. So he was more like a general, and he became king. And Belshazzar, of course, was Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. So there's the line and how Belshazzar. There's another thing I should have mentioned, that Belshazzar would have been more nearer the family of the kings than Nabonidus, because Nabonidus himself wasn't a part of the family. Belshazzar was. Nabonidus died, of course, in 539 BC. And so that was the time, of course, when Cyrus was coming in and took over the city of Babylon.
Now, one of the problems for a lot of people is that history tells us that Nabonidus was the last king of Babylon, whereas the Bible tells us that Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon. And so you can see the problem here is twofold. One is that some people think that Belshazzar wasn't real, and if he wasn't real, he certainly could not be a king. So why does the Bible describe Belshazzar as king?
Well, that's an interesting one. This is one of those questions that the skeptics looked at, and they said, well, there you are. We know that Belshazzar wasn't the last king of Babylon. We know because we've got literally thousands of cuneiform texts with Nabonidus on there. And so they thought, well, because Nabonidus was the last king, why does Daniel say that Belshazzar was king? Well, that's a simple one, really, because the story of Nabonidus is an interesting one, because he actually left for about 10 years. He never lived anywhere near Babylon. He was way over in the Arabian desert, doing one thing and another, and left the entire city of Babylon under the authority of his eldest son Belshazzar. And so it wasn't really uncommon, to think that the Prince Regent would be called king. In fact, in the Nabonidus Chronicle, he's even called the crowned prince. So he did really have the authority of a king. The Bible is very accurate because even though it doesn't mention Nabonidus, it clearly tells us that there must have been a king as well as Belshazzar. And let me read you something from Daniel itself. And it's in Daniel chapter 5. And this is, of course, we are very familiar, of course, with that famous writing on the wall. And after Daniel had shown Belshazzar exactly what the meaning of those words were, the Bible goes on to say this. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Now, that is so profound, reason being, because it does show that if he was the third highest, there was obviously two rulers higher than him. And of course, Belshazzar was the second, who was acting king or crown prince. And then, of course, it would have been Nabonidus, who was the actual king, who had gone off into the Arabian desert for 10 years. And, there he stayed. So Belshazzar's title as a crown prince would have simply meant that he was acting king of Babylon. There is nothing, no critique or no criticism about that. He was actually in the position of a king of Babylon. And the Bible proves that, of course.
So really, the issue seems to have come in that it's just simply that the Bible doesn't seem to mention Nabonidus, and that's where the issue seems to come in then, it seems, doesn't it?
Well, Nabonidus, we could say that the Bible didn't need to mention him because he simply wasn't in Babylon when the Medo-Persian and the Cyrus, of course, came and took the city. But prior to that, of course, Nabonidus had been in the historical records. He had been captured by Cyrus. So the only one left to capture now, of course, was Belshazzar. And that's when we get the story of Cyrus coming in and taking the city without a shot being fired, by the way.
So there we see nicely then the Bible and Babylonian history seem to meet very nicely together because they both affirm that Belshazzar was given the authority as a king.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, harmonization is perfect. I think Daniel, he's got it absolutely right. I mean, it's absolutely spot on. Amazing. It's an amazing book.
And then a third point, Dad, I'd like to ask. It seems that something else that has caused people a bit of trouble is that the Bible says that Belshazzar was the son of Nebuchadnezzar, whereas history tells us he was the son of Nabonidus. So are we dealing with a contradiction, or can this be explained in any way?
Oh, I certainly can. If you look at the word, by the way, it's interesting. There is no actual word in Hebrew, and certainly not in the Babylonian text for the word grandfather. Although the translations have put that in, but we don't have a word for grandfather, just father. But 5 times the narrative of Daniel chapter 5 refers to Nebuchadnezzar as Belshazzar's father. And we say, well, why is that? Well, one of the main reasons is because the word father could sometimes mean relative. Let me give you an example. The Jews, for example, they would talk about Father Abraham because they used the word father in a way that it was like a relational title. Or if we take the word son, a famous story in the New Testament, of course, would be the story of blind Bartimaeus. Remember, he was calling out to Jesus, Son of David, Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. Now, we know literally that Jesus was not the biological son of David, but it wasn't meant in that way. The son simply means related to, a relative of. And because Bartimaeus could see Jesus was the Messiah, of course, the Messiah had to be related to King David. So the word son, the word father can be used in many ways. It can be used literally, or it could be used figuratively and spiritually. So we shouldn't be too sort of unnervy about such titles when he calls Nebuchadnezzar his father. Really, it was his grandfather, because Nabonidus wasn't a part of the Nebuchadnezzar's family, but he did marry. So historians have suggested that he was married to Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. And so Belshazzar would have been then a biological relative of Nebuchadnezzar. But we shouldn't be too uptight when we think of these titles of father and son. They're used in numerous ways.
Right. So I suppose if you didn't understand those sort of non-literal meanings, you could find yourself in a twist with this history then.
You can. I mean, biblical language sometimes, it can be, if you look at it on face value, sometimes you could probably get the wrong context. But words like father, words like son, they are used in numerous ways, but mainly in the biblical sense, they simply mean relative, related to, even though they can mean a biological son, biological father. Right. So there's no contradiction, there's no discrepancy. I think it's just a way that Daniel has portrayed the story to us correctly.
Is it correct that some say Daniel went to exile at the age of 15 and he stayed there till his 80s? Is that right?
Yes. When Nebuchadnezzar became king, his father died in 605 BC. And Nebuchadnezzar at the time was on a conquest. He was at a campaign in Egypt. And what he did, he had to rush back, of course, to Babylon, where he became the king at the coronation. And what he did, he decided to drop off at Jerusalem and just take a few people back with him. It just showed the Babylonians that he was an all-conquering king. And of course, Daniel and his friends and a few others would have been the first deportation at that time. So Daniel was there for quite a long time. Yeah, he'd been a young man, and he was there until he was an elderly man. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Dad, and I hope this has been helpful to all our viewers. I hope you can see that there is no contradiction between the Bible's history and other historical records. I was just reminded that the people of God were in many different empires around the world, such as Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon. And of course, they would have recorded their own histories, and we have the Bible as history, and we can see here that they match up perfectly and that there is no contradiction. But we do hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions, please write it in the comments section, or if you'd like to write to us individually, you can visit our website, which is www.trosnant.org. And you can also email us, and I will put that information on the screens for you. But thank you very much, and we hope that you have enjoyed this.